Hello, everyone. This is Joanne Lantz, and I am here with another episode of Masters of Extraordinary Proficiency, ordinary people doing extraordinary thing. And I have a fun and fabulous guest this month that I'd like to introduce you to. I'd like to introduce you to Lindsay Skilling, fifth generation family owner and CEO of Giffords Ice Cream. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I can't think of a funner business than ice cream. I don't even know if funner is a word, but July is National Ice Cream Month, and we just passed National Ice Cream Day, and I did my part to support Giffords Ice Cream.
Oh,
And
thank you.
freezer has lots of Giffords in it. So if your sales go up, I think I had a lot to do with it this month.
I think I did too. I keep my freezer stocked too. Yeah.
Uh, Well, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so chatting a little bit about yourself and a little about ice cream and a lot about leadership. And I've heard such wonderful compliments about you and have actually met you on a panel last year. And I'm looking forward to the next 30 minutes.
Well, me too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Now, Lindsay, you were born in Skowhegan, Maine. Coincidentally, Senator Angus King, who was a guest on this interview program a few months ago, started his career in Skowhegan, Maine. Giffords is a family-owned business. You had a household full of people and cousins and siblings and activity. How did that prepare you for Giffords?
I think that for speaking for myself and most likely my siblings and cousins, we didn't really think of it when we were younger. It was just part of our everyday. I remember always coming to what we refer to as the dairy. It's where our main offices are today in our manufacturing plant. And we were always here kind of playing together. Our parents were doing what they needed to do to make ice cream and run the business. And also, my mom, when our first ice cream stand opened right in Skowhegan, Maine, and we had a mini golf course, I have a brother and a sister, so she'd have to take us kids to the ice cream stand to, make waffle cones or whatever needed to be done. And oftentimes she'd have to work at the mini golf course, and my sister, who's 6 years younger than me, she'd be in a playpen napping in the little shack, and us kids would be cleaning off the course and, special deliveries on 4th of July or Memorial Day, whatever it took with our dad. So it was our norm. We didn't know any different. But I would say that, it prepared us in the sense of, you do whatever it is that you need to do to run a successful business. You do what you say you're going to do. And if you work hard, then hopefully, things will go your way and you can be successful. So yeah, it was just kind of, it didn't seem different. I guess, you know what I mean? It just was how we grew up around
Now,
it every day.
as children, you used to play Giffords, I understand. Can you walk
Yeah.
me through playing Giffords, going to
Yeah.
high school, and you actually worked for the Chamber of Commerce, I think, in high school.
Yes, I did.
Walk me through all that. How do you
Yeah.
play Giffords?
Well, how I played Giffords, I would have friends over, and my dad would have old uh, order guides, and they'd be the carbon copy prints, so you could rip them off and have fun with them. I thought it was fun anyway. So we would, my friends and I, we would have fake phones and pretend that people were calling and ordering Giffords, and we'd go through the order guide and uh, take people's orders, and then we'd hang up little clips for folks in shipping to put the orders together for us to get them out the door. And oh my gosh, we would have blasts. My dad would bring home, always when we were younger, he would bring home old, sales materials or things that were outdated and they didn't use anymore. And it was like, when he brought home stuff, I was tickled pink. I get so excited. I'd play with all the stuff. I'd even, when I was younger, he would bring home, if it was a snow day, or I would come into the office with him if I didn't have school, and he would have me, put different packets together for our sales folks. And it was just, going through on a big table and collecting these papers and stapling together these packets together. I was happy as a clam just to be helping and something that he didn't have to do. So again, growing up in the business, right? Just from that small little task. And then I would work summers in the office doing, learning accounts payable, things like that. And then in high school, I believe it was my freshman year, the executive director at the time didn't have anyone really assisting her. She was working really hard, and she needed some help for upcoming programs, and she needed to be able to take some time off also to have some downtime. So I worked at the Skowhegan Chamber, and I tell you, it was so much fun just meeting different businesses and owners in the town of Skowhegan, and just, folks passing through on vacation. It was a unique and interesting and fun experience that I had the opportunity to enjoy. So
I bet you must be one of the youngest employees of a Chamber of Commerce anywhere, to be a freshman in high school and actually working at the chamber by yourself at times.
yeah.
Also, what an awesome experience because of meeting people. And I can relate to being a child and having items at home. I'm in the merchandising business, and so we have all these great promotional items and merchandising items. And I remember some of our sons just saying, wow, you play with toys all day long. And they never quite understood the connection of what we did as adults versus what we seen through the lens of a child.
I've started actually bringing home things like that for my daughter. My son doesn't really have any interest in playing with that type of stuff, but my daughter, she gets excited and she starts like playing Office and stuff. So who knows? Maybe one day.
Sixth generation. You're fifth generation. You went to Bryant College, and our David Geiger, who is fifth generation, spent 1 year. I thought he spent 2 years, but he corrected me. He spent 1 year at Bryant College before he went to USC. What advice would you have for David Geiger? I hope he's listening. As one fifth generation family member of a business to another one.
Yeah, I guess, truly, if you're passionate about it, then go for it. I would say, to David and to any, person that is thinking about entering a family business, make sure you are truly passionate and it's what you want to do and not what you feel is expected of you, because otherwise no one wins. If you're not having fun and passionate about what you're doing for the rest of your life, then what good is it, and are you to anyone really? So I would say, make sure you're passionate about what you're doing and the role in which you're playing within the family business as well.
I think those are wise words, and I'm anxious to hear his reaction to that. I'll let you know what he says.
Okay.
So you spoke a little bit about your siblings and your cousins. How does Gifford decide who does what in the business? That can be, if they're all passionate, how do you decide?
Right. And there really was no and is no magical crystal ball, it's just how things evolved, at least at Giffords. We all have different passions, and we're, my brother, he's just got a natural gift for, talking to people and selling things. So he's the VP of sales. My sister, she is our marketing manager. She's very creative, and she's a millennial. She's got all these great ideas and concepts. My cousin, he is our QA manager. He worked in production and worked as a production supervisor. So things just evolved as needs came about. We either jumped into the fire, if you will, or our paths kind of steered us to different positions. Mine kind of evolved over the years based on, again, the needs. I worked right out of college. I was hired as the assistant to the controller. I think that was my title. So I worked in the office doing, all finance aspects alongside her, and it just evolved over the years. I had to jump into being the VP of Sales and Marketing for a few years, and then it evolved to General Manager, and then now to CEO. But it's not like my dad and uncle kind of said, this is where you're going to be. It just evolved over the years.
I'm sure it was as much you're evaluating what you like doing and what you were had a proclivity to do. I don't like to use the word natural because nothing is natural. You have to really invest in education,
right?
As well as your father and your uncle watching all of you. Now, there's a fascinating story about you and your Uncle Roger. Two things I were hearing about. One is that children don't report to their parents, their dad.
Right.
And so therefore you worked with your Uncle Roger, and something about being attached at the hip or attached at the desk. What was that? What was that all about?
Yeah, and I tell you, Joanne, I had just moved into my own office. I was so proud of that moment. And then just like that, I had a shared office again. No, all kidding aside, I look back at this decision that my dad and uncle made, and I think, wow, they are brilliant. I learned so much in that period of time that they literally took my desk, moved it into my uncle's desk, and my desk was attached to his. They wanted me to hear every, in-person interaction. When he had phone calls, he would put it on speaker so I could hear the full conversation. When he was working on documents or recipes, he would turn his computer screen so I could see it. In his office, which is now our conference room, we had a conference room kind of table, so all meetings took place in his office. So I would sit at the table. It wasn't him keeping me at my desk. And I tell you, as I was young, and oftentimes it could be intimidating, dealing with different conversations that, I felt maybe I shouldn't be involved in. But, in hindsight, I learned so much during that period of time. It was one of the best things that I feel they could have done to kind of get a full perspective of things that are conversations that are being had or situations that arise.
So you were party to all conversations, conversations about employee performance, colleagues, financial, all conversations. Wow.
Everything. And I remember one time there was a conversation that wasn't a scheduled meeting, just, family business open door policy, and someone was a little upset, and I said, maybe I'll just take and my uncle said, I want you to hear this. And he was very good about either before a meeting or after a meeting or a conversation, kind of giving me the full picture of what was just discussed so that I could put things together. It was a unique situation. Oftentimes I would go home at night and talk to my dad. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a lot going on, but I just look back and I'm just, the opportunity that gave me to kind of learn more about the business, it was the best decision I think they could have made. So.
Yeah, I think about, again, our business, and we have sales partners. And so many of them are bringing in their children in the business or their relatives or their spouses, and they literally work side by side. And what a terrific analogy of truly learning and being immersed in the business. And perhaps a little bit intimidating for your colleagues as well to see why this young person was sitting in on this private conversation, and yet they got to know you in a professional way. I think it is brilliant. It really is. So
Yeah.
I'm going to take note of that. Now, you were also in a board meeting, I understand, taking minutes, and you learned something about your father during that board meeting. Do
Oh
you
my
know what
goodness.
I'm referring to? And what happened, and how did that change your business trajectory?
Yes. So at the time of this said board meeting, it was when I was attached to my uncle's desk. So at that time, they would have me in all meetings, and if they need someone to take the minutes or take notes or whatnot, I would do that for them. And so it was a board meeting, and I was taking the minutes. And we're working our way through the agenda, and at some point in time, my uncle brought up, and my father brought up, that my father had gone to his doctor, and his doctor had said, in a roundabout way, that John, who's my father, you're walking a thin line. You need to step back from the stress. Your health is, it's not a good situation right now. You need to step away from stress. And then they drop this, right, information. And I'm I've always been very close with my parents and my siblings and whatnot. This is a shock to me because I had not heard this information. I was living with my parents at the time out of college, and I hear this information, and I'm in shock. And they just carry on starting, going through the next bullet point on the agenda. So I had to, step up and say, can we we need to just pause for a second, and can we go back to that, because I didn't hear a solution. I heard a problem with no solution, and this is my dad, and this is the first time I'm hearing this, so what are we doing about this? And they kind of all just, I remember them just looking at me kind of like, well, what can we do? There is no solution. He runs the sales and marketing of the business. So they said, well, what do you suggest we do? So after, I'm swinging by the,
You just hear this information. Oh my
I
gosh.
didn't have time to digest it. So I said, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. No one can, I pretty much wanted to be a buffer for my dad. And I said, starting right now, no one can call dad. They have to go through me. That means externally, internally. He was running sales, so it was a constant, They had my parents' home phone number. They would call weekends, nights, all hours of the night. I said, from now on, they go through me. And if it's something I can't handle, then I will, at the right time, get advice or help from my dad or my uncle to get an answer, or our other sales family members. All of his emails we had go through to me, get directed to me. If anybody in the sales family, if they needed to get to my dad, they had to go through me. And so that evolved to, I don't know how long I did that. And then I became the VP of sales and marketing at that point. And my dad was able to slow down. Because, I know my dad, and I knew when I could approach him with questions where I wouldn't stress him out. And it's all about in the, the approach, right? How you approach a conversation versus, here's the situation, but here's what I think I should do. Here's the solution to this problem, versus just saying, using him as a coach, if you will. Here's the problem. What do I need to do? So I think it worked out well. He was able to step back, and things worked out. But I just think back to that day. I'm like, if I didn't have the confidence, I guess, to stand up and ask, well, what are we going to do? What would we have done? So
I've never heard that analogy here. Give it somebody something on a coat hanger versus,
yeah,
here's the problem. You're giving it to you on a coat hanger. You
right.
fix
Just
it.
hang
You
all
hit
your
it.
problems on me. I'm not a coat hanger. Come to me with a
Wow.
solution.
What's the solution? I like that. I'm going to use that. Probably use that in the next few weeks. So your sales and marketing, how was it decided though that you're going to be CEO? How did that decision come about? Did you apply for it? Were you just told? I don't.
Yeah, I just was told, I was a general manager at the time, and my father and uncle were slowing down even more so. My uncle, he would leave for the winter and go to Florida. My dad wasn't really coming into the office as much anymore. And I was just told that my new title was CEO. Again, very informal. I didn't apply for it or anything.
So they recognized your ability to come up with solutions. At the end of the day, you were the right person to move into that. Has your authority ever been challenged? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I have learned, and I'm still learning, to, always try to see someone else's perspective and to take a step back and breathe and just digest what I'm hearing. And, 9 out of 10 times what I've noticed is there's miscommunication somewhere. And if I just can see where that miscommunication is coming from, or perhaps I need to rephrase something in a different manner, that typically that's why something is being challenged, because something they don't understand what is being communicated to them, and that's my failure, and where I need to continue to grow is continue working on my communication skills. So
Same here. I'm doing the same thing. And I often fail and miscommunicate, or I think I'm saying something, but people hear it's not what I intended for sure.
Right.
We've gone through a lot of challenges in leadership, in the last decade, between the recession and the 08, 09, and this little thing called COVID. That's not so little. It's actually very serious. What has been your most difficult challenge in leadership?
Hands down, COVID-19. It aged me. Let's just put it that way, along with, I'm sure, everyone else. It was just scary, if you will, for more reasons than one. Just the unknown of how is that going to impact our family business. And I'm driving the bus, if you will, and I need to navigate us through this pandemic. And as a leader, sometimes it's challenging to keep that smile on your face all the time, and to everything's going to be great. Staying positive. It can be draining. But I'll tell you, I feel that I have the best leadership group and family members and support. At work, at home with my husband, and my kids are so understanding. I have the right leadership team for me that supports me and challenges me, and we can bounce ideas off each other's heads, and there's no one right answer, so that truly helped us. Sticking together and leaning on one another really got us through the tough times, which was really March and April of 2020, the uncertainty of what was going to happen.
Did you have to shut down production at all, or what steps did you take? Because I mean, you're manufacturing, you're producing a good that is going into
Right.
people, and other than perhaps alcohol, I think ice cream is your number one comfort food, and even more so. And I mean that seriously. How did you cope with that?
So at the time, it was so we have 5 ice cream stands that we own and operate, and our stands were gearing up to open that third Friday of March when things really were, you know, becoming a you know, media and whatnot. So we made the family decision that we were not going to open our 5 stands. There was too much uncertainty. We wanted to make sure that when we opened, we had enough information, the facts, so that we could keep our family members safe to, you know, dealing with the public as well as our customers. So we did not open our 5 family stands until middle of May. So
Wow.
and that's the first time we've ever had to do that. Usually we're third Friday of March with a snowstorm or rainstorm, it doesn't matter. And as far as production goes, we had started probably a month or so before this happened. We were at 6 days production because we can't make enough ice cream that we sell in July, so we started selling off site, and we kind of put the brakes on and we said, okay, we have enough right now in storage. I mean, it was a risky decision. At the end of the day, we made the right decision, but we had to gamble a bit and hope that, you know, what we had in storage, number one, would sell at some point, which it did, definitely did, thankfully. But we only produced in the month of April only what we had to, only if it wasn't in storage, if we were completely out of stock, that is what we decided. And then, you know, come July last summer, we had to make ice cream 7 days a week to kind of play catch up. But at the end of the day, that was our decision. And I think in hindsight, we wouldn't have changed that decision. It was the best decision. So.
That is a frightening decision, because when you look back on it, it seems logical, but at the time, to actually halt production, which meant it impacted people's lives and jobs, and not know how long this would last. And then how do you protect people last summer, where in a manufacturing environment where we didn't know, there were a lot of details, we didn't know how to keep ourselves safe. That really is a courageous decision. And you sell more than the ice cream stands. You sell retail on a national basis. I mean,
Right.
when I mentioned to my friends Giffords, they go, "Oh my gosh, we love Giffords." So you know, the retail side is a big part of your business. Let's talk
Right.
a little bit about ice cream. There is a reason why today retail is such a big part of the business, and it goes all the way back to a decision your family made in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
We had 2 businesses, correct? This was your dad, John, and Uncle Roger. Roger, I shouldn't call him Uncle Roger, he's my
Yep.
uncle. Uncle Roger, hi Uncle Roger. But they made a big decision that really changed the trajectory of the business. Also equally risky in their time. What was that?
Yeah. So in the 80s, at the time it was my father and my uncle, and then my grandparents, Audrey and Randall. They were, you know, on the downside, we'll say, you know, closer to retirement. And Oakhurst Dairy actually approached my father and uncle, and to see if they were interested in selling the business, the milk portion of our business. At that time, we had excess milk and cream. So my uncle and father were, you know, getting back to kind of our roots, if you will, from back in Connecticut and making premium ice cream. So they approached my grandfather and grandmother and said, "Hey, we were approached by Oakhurst. They're interested in purchasing the dairy portion of the business." And my grandparents basically left it up to my dad and uncle and said, "You know, this is your future. You know, we're retiring. What do you two want to do with the business? Where do you want to take it?" And so they took a gamble again and a risk, and they sold the milk portion of the business to Oakhurst, who we still are partnered with today and get all of our milk and cream from still. And they took all the every cent of the sale, and they put it into the equipment and what they needed to do to get our plant, in a position to make solely premium ice cream. So that was, and family businesses, a unique thing that my grandparents also gave them that opportunity to make that decision. It wasn't made for them. So I think that I look back at that, and I sit on the board for Institute for Family-Owned Business, and that does seem unique to other things I've heard. So
I am in awe in so many levels for your grandparents to literally delegate the decision and not influence the decision or want to dissect or provide background, and truly allowed John and Roger to make the decision of the business, and to go from what seems to be the larger part of the business, the milk and the cream, the dairy part, and to invest into retail, which could be risky sometimes, in production. That's quite amazing and impressive on multiple areas. How many gallons of ice cream did you make back then, or did they make back then? Because you weren't born in the 80s, or you were probably a young child. How many did they make then, and how many gallons do you make today?
Yeah.
In a year?
So to put things into perspective, they made 10,000 gallons of ice cream in a given year. We make that daily now. So just to show also, how far my father and uncle took the business. We sell close to 2.3 million gallons now a year. So that just shows you how hard they had to work to get the business where it is today.
So my 4th of July week consumption of ice cream did not impact your sales, I don't think.
Oh, it did. It did.
But that's my goal now. How do you think leadership has changed from either when you started or from when let's compare leadership back then versus leadership today. How do you think it's changed?
Yeah. So, and I think about this often too, and try to think of what my uncle and father must have been going through, how scary of a time that must have been when they did sell the milk portion of the business. They had 5 employees working for them at the time, and they were trying to grow the business and, again, keep that smile on their face, because they weren't going to fail, they were going to succeed. And I think that I would say about the 4th generation, I think they were more reserved in the information they were sharing. They felt, maybe we only need to tell people what they need to know when they need to know it. And if they don't need to know at all, then we'll give them only the information they need. I would say that my generation, we're more of an open book. Yeah, we share more information. I think that, and again, this is, times have definitely changed from the 80s to today. And I think my generation, I would say that we share more information because we feel that if you're sharing the right information with folks, it can empower them, and maybe they have a better idea too, that can help shift something. So we do share a lot more information than previous generations.
It's transparency and leadership, which means telling information that may be negative, not positive, but the true situation, the true facts. It sounds easy, and it is so difficult, because when you share what potentially could be negative, either about our own performance or the performance of the business, you feel like you've let somebody down, and you want to paint a rosy picture. As a parent, I want to do that, and that's not true leadership. True leadership is to share the actual facts.
Right.
I agree. All right. I love ice cream. Anything butter pecan, butter crunch. if I'm going to order ice cream, it better have butter in it. What's your favorite ice cream? Can you say that?
Yeah, so mine, it's a combination. It's hard for me to decide. So when I go to our ice cream stands, I often get, if it's not a coffee frap, then I often get a scoop of mint chip, a scoop of black raspberry, a scoop of orange sherbet in a homemade waffle cone, and they dip the waffle cone so it's got the chocolate coating and then it's got rainbow sprinkles on it. It is, yeah, it's delicious. I highly recommend it.
It sounds like a smorgasbord of ice cream, and that sounds really good.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for young people today? You mentioned you have children, and what advice do you have for people today, young people?
I would say, whatever goal you have, whatever you set your mind on that you want to achieve, go for it. And share that goal with other people. Don't, because oftentimes leaders like yourself and so many other leaders, we want to make sure that we support, we can't achieve it for you, but we can support you. And, oftentimes you hear of folks, they had a goal and, they hit a roadblock, and so they didn't pursue that goal or that dream. And that's life. We're going to hit roadblocks, but you just have to pivot a little. Just pivot a little. You still can stay the course and reach that goal or that dream or whatever it may be. But in sharing what that goal is, I mean, how great is it to have support backing you, encouraging you to not give up and to stay the course. And there's not always going to be great times, and it's just how we kind of navigate through them to get to where we want to get to. So
that's so true. People will not only cheer you, they'll help you, and if you share, and they see that you're actually making an effort, working towards it, they'll help you.
Open doors of opportunities, or make connections for you to help with your networking, to help with that goal or that dream. Yeah.
Where do you see Giffords going in the future? Can you share that?
Yeah, long term, it would be, our sixth generation is very young. My nephew is the oldest in that generation, and he's almost 12. He's 11, so I'm still very, very young. My kids are, let's see, they're 5 and 8. So it would be nice one day for that sixth generation, if they're interested, to enter the family business, but that's a ways off. So in the more near future, there's still so many people, even in Maine and certainly in New England, that have never heard of Giffords. And so it's my goal and my job to make sure that we continue to share our family ice cream and brand, and have more loyal fans and customers along the way.
Well, I hope this video helps you accomplish your dream. And if you're watching this and you haven't tried Giffords ice cream, absolutely do it, because it's beyond divine. And you've heard both of our recommendations, so I'm going to turn this into an ad for you of what our favorite ice creams are, and ice cream flavors are. And I wish you the best of success. Lindsay, you truly are an extraordinary person doing extraordinary things. And I thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and thanks for reaching out to me. I really appreciate it. I'm honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.